Hi there, welcome to my channel. Today we are working on a knitmaster 321. Select the number of needles you want to use, and here I am using an E-rack cast on. The number of needles that you choose will be determined by the cables that you are using. So for today the numbers are basically 7, 6 and 7 for the cabling work and for the decorative effect. Basically I've just added extra needles to the pattern samples so that I could just work from the center. So you find your center of where your needles are going to be for the cable, and then that's where you work from. So if you have extra stitches, it doesn't really matter. The 4 needles represent where the cable's going to be. And what you do is you take the first stitch on the outside of the cable and you transfer it to the left, and you transfer 1 stitch to the right. This is the 6 stitches that you'll be working with. Those 2 needles that you've transferred from, you push them into non-working position. Knit 2 rows to start your patterning. When you start your patterning, you skip 1 stitch and you go on to the next 7 needles that you'll be working with. Transfer 3 needles to the right and 3 needles to the left, so that your center needle will have 3 stitches on it. This is the start of your decorative stitching. Because the camera was in the way, I found it really difficult to do the transfers because it's such small little pieces to work with. Make sure the empty needle that you transferred from goes back into working position. Do the same decorative stitching on the right side of the cables. Miss 1 stitch from the cables and then transfer 3 needles from the left side to the right side and 3 needles from the right side to the left side. So you'll have a center needle which will have 3 stitches on it. When you transfer the stitches, I found if you do left or right doesn't really matter as long as you get to that needle point in the center, and it looks the same on the other side whether it's left or right. This is where I transfer the stitches to do the cable, and it was very tricky to do, trying to hold these 4 stitches together without dropping them. Transfer from the left and then transfer to the right. Make sure the 2 needles on either side of the cable are in non-working position. Knit 2 rows and you've done your first cabling and also your eyelets. You start transferring the 7 needles where you put 3 on the left and 3 on the right. Don't worry too much about the cabling, because I found that you know, if I forgot about the cabling, it didn't really matter as long as you've got your count for the decorative stitches on either side. And then if your cabling's a bit longer or shorter, it doesn't really matter. It's just a case of just learning how to work the decorative stitches. I'm trying to show the decorative stitches and the cabling at different angles so that you can see how it works. This video is a little bit longer than I hoped, but I realized it can be really tricky to see the different angles. I did get this from another video, this method, but it took me a while to try and figure out where the positioning of the needles were. With the cabling, you transfer 2 stitches on the right and 2 stitches on the left, which means that the 2 needles in the center will go into non-working position. This is just to create what they call floats across the top, which falls into the decorative process. The decorative stitching and the cables doesn't look really interesting on the wrong side of the knit or the purl side, and it's only when you see the front side of the knitting do you see how interesting it looks. This is me transferring the 3 stitches to the left and 3 stitches to the right. Just make sure that you've skipped one stitch from the cable, but you will actually see it running up along the side, so you just look at how the stitches have formed and then you can gauge a measurement to it. So you don't always have to use a count in order to make it work. Initially this pattern was very difficult to do. I had done cabling and stitches before, but the pattern was really quite basic for what I did. And I came across this pattern and I thought, well, this more complicated pattern, and I thought, well, it would be nice to try and see what it looks like. Another angle of doing the decorative stitch where you transfer from the left and transfer from the right, making sure that your center needle has 3 stitches on it, because it's basically worked on 7 stitches. Basically, when you're working your rows, you will be working 4 rows with especially with the cable, where you have the 2 needles in non-working position. So it actually works out to 4 rows. Don't worry too much about the cables. If you miss to transfer it or to measure it, just make sure you got your count correct and that you can see the stitches. Once you get into the rhythm of it, it will actually get better and you'll be able to decide how you want your cables. You can actually make your cables longer or shorter. It just depends on how you want it to look. As I worked, I found it got a little bit easier and a little bit easier as you go along. It was just really still difficult with the camera, even on the side, that I was struggling to see how the stitches were going. This is where you transfer your cable stitches, and what you do is you've got two non-working stitches in the center, and what you do is you move inwards by 2 stitches, and what you do is from the left you go inwards 2 stitches, and from the right you go 2 stitches inwards, and then the stitches on either side are put into non-working position. So this is where you're going to start your cable again, but you're going to do 2 rows before you actually do your cable. This is not actually cabling, this is just you joining 2 stitches together just to start your cabling. And like I said, you will be doing 2 rows before you do your cabling. Here's a close-up of when you transfer the 3 stitches. And when you transfer the 3 stitches 1 needle over, the empty needle that you got needs to stay in working position because that forms the eyelet. And here you're transferring it to the left side, and just to make sure that that center needle has 3 stitches on it. Here is when I start doing the cabling. You've got your 4 stitches in the center, you transfer to the right, and then you transfer to the left. The cabling is quite easy once you get the idea of how the count works. And like I said, you can have it longer or shorter, the cables, it doesn't really matter. And you can fit them into how you do your stitching for the decorative stitches. Here's another angle of where I'm transferring the 3 stitches over by 1 needle. Just make sure that needle is placed back into working position so it can form the eyelet, and just make sure that your decorative stitch has 3 stitches on the center needle to complete the pattern process. Here's another angle of where you transfer the 3 stitches. I always find it much easier to see from the front to see how the decorative stitches work. Here is a tip that I found that might be quite useful. I was finding when I was transferring the stitches that it was really difficult to transfer the stitches, but I found what you do is when you push the needles in, you make sure that those needles come up into a position that are in relation to the stitch next to it, so that when you transfer your stitches it's much easier. So you push it up and then you transfer your stitches, and it actually was much easier to do when you transfer your stitches that way. When I finished this cabling, I had a look to see how it went. Initially when I started it, I got the count wrong and I didn't really understand it, and then I started to get a hang of it, and then I just knitted some more, and then I started again, and there was a number of mistakes I did. I did the cabling incorrectly there, and then I started to get the cabling more correct, and just to see how it is. I did try a separate piece as well, just to practice the decorative effect when I was on this side doing the eyelets. I wanted to try and get it to be a little bit better, and sometimes you just got to practice and get it the way you want it to look. And I found it much easier just to divide it up and just do it into little sections just to see how it worked. So here we have the final stitches, and it's really very interesting. I really found it quite interesting to look at. This is the end of the video. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and leave a comment, and I will be looking to see the next projects I want to do.